entitled Moving Forward. My name is Jerry Bogaz. I'm an assistant director here with the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council staff. The comment period that we're in the middle of runs from June 28th through July 27th. So there will be time after this session today to submit additional comments. But this is also an opportunity not only to learn about the plan and what it contains, but also to submit comments as part of today's review session. The last public review session will be tonight at 7 p.m. I want to acknowledge Jan Kahn, who is on the web meeting right now. Jan is our regional planning manager. He and his staff have spent over 2 years working with our member agencies to pull this plan together. So thank you for your efforts, Jan. And thank you to our member agencies for everything they did to contribute to the plan. We are going to be using an interactive platform today as we go through this presentation. So I'm going to ask Jessica Ortiz, who will be the other voice you hear today, to quickly go through that platform and how it works. Jessica?
Thanks, Jerry. So, hi again, I'm Jessica Ortiz. And before I walk you through the Poll Everywhere platform, I wanted to walk you through the Webex platform that we're all currently on. If you're accessing the meeting from a computer, the screen and buttons will look very similar to the image on this slide. The placement of the features will be different depending on the device you are using. And so there are two button features that I wanted to point out to everyone. The first button is the mute button. As you've already noticed, you've been placed on mute, and this is to reduce the background noise and to minimize any interruptions to the presentation. You'll be muted throughout the entire presentation, so please stay on mute. The next slide, the next button is the comment button, and we'll be collecting comments two ways today. The first is by utilizing this comment button, and so once you have selected that comment button, which is that kind of thought bubble at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to type a message in the chat window, and then on the left, you'll be able to select submit, and we'll see your comment in the message window. The second way we'll be collecting comments is, as Jerry mentioned, through the use of Poll Everywhere. And so I just want to let everybody know that we've placed question prompts throughout the presentation to collect your comments. And so we are recording these comments, and we really encourage you to share your opinions today. And so to respond to the questions that we've placed throughout the presentation, please visit pollev.com/NEMTEK. This is an absolutely anonymous web platform that you can sign in and share your opinions. And so you'll be able to use the link that we're going to place in the chat message board to access those poll questions. And so once you respond to those questions, we'll be able to record them. And so today we're not responding specifically to any questions. We will respond to questions in the final plan document. And so now that we've had some time to access Poll Everywhere, I wanted to walk you all through our first activity. And so we're really interested in finding out where you're from today. And I just want to reiterate, in order to participate in this poll, please visit pollev.com/NEMTEK. And so the way that this activity works is that you'll be able to place a pin on where you're participating on the map. So all you have to do is just tap the map, and your pin will be dropped. So I'll give everybody a moment to access that activity. And you can access that poll again by going to pollev.com/NEMTEK. And so I see that somebody is participating from Nassau County today. Welcome. We'll give you all a few more minutes to access the poll. There's somebody from Rockland County. Welcome as well. Great. Thank you. And so we'll move forward to the next Poll Everywhere question. And so we're really interested in finding out how you learned about our public review sessions. And these are just a couple of multiple choice responses. And so you'll be able to respond once to how you found out about the meeting. We've sent notices by snail mail and through email. We've included the meeting announcement in our NEMTEK Notes quarterly newsletter. We've sent media releases to local papers throughout the region. We've done social media messaging. We acknowledge that word of mouth is still a way a lot of people find out about meetings, and that's great. And then we also acknowledge that there are other ways of finding out the meetings, like by text or a flyer of some sort. So we really want to find out how you learned about the meeting today. And I see somebody found out about the meeting through email. Great. And so I wanted to walk us all through some ground rules of today. So you've noticed, and I've mentioned before, that you've been placed on mute. So if you could remain muted to reduce any background noise or interruptions to the presentation, that would be great. And the two ways that we're collecting comments today are by using Poll Everywhere, and then by using the chat window. So if we're going throughout the presentation and you have a comment that you'd like to let us know about, I would encourage you to place it in the message board or wait until we get to the interactive polling questions through Poll Everywhere. And so as you've already noticed and heard, this meeting is being recorded, and we will place the meeting recording on the Moving Forward website so that people that were not able to attend the meeting today will be able to listen to the meeting recording and share their comments on the comment form that we have on that website. So now I'll hand it back to Jerry.
Thank you, Jessica. So I want to do a bit of an introduction here so you can get a sense of the context for this plan and what it does for the region and bringing federal dollars into our region. So if we can go to the next slide. First of all, the objectives of these sessions. You can see that we're trying to provide information about the plan and the related congestion management process, both of which are federally required for a region to be eligible for federal funding. We are also going to hopefully be directing participants to additional information and documentation that's available online in case you wanted to dig more deeply into some of these topics and potentially research parts of them for future comments. We are going to collect public commentary as you offer it today for formal response in the plan document, so feel free to make use of that. And we're going to direct participants to avenues for further commentary during the comment period. And again, that runs through 4 p.m. on July 27th. So it's a couple more calendar days through the end of the comment period. Next slide. So first, we're going to give you an overview of NEMTEK and the planning process, and we're going to do that through a quick video. So Jessica, I guess you're going to start that.
Welcome to the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. Established in 1982, NEMTEK is the metropolitan planning organization for New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Our 10-county region includes the 5 boroughs of New York City, plus Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties, and is home to more than 12 million people. NEMTEK's principals include 9 voting members and 7 advisory members, comprised of 5 suburban county executives, 2 New York City commissioners, the New York State Transportation Commissioner, and the chief executive of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Advisory members include the New York State Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, the chief executives of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Transit, and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, and the local administrators of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Federal legislation requires that metropolitan regions must have a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, to plan for and make decisions on the use of federal transportation funding. Approximately $10 to $15 billion of federal funding comes into the region during each 5-year funding period. NEMTEK ensures that existing and future spending for transportation projects and programs is based on a cooperative, comprehensive, and continuing planning process. The elected and appointed officials who comprise NEMTEK have a shared vision, recognizing that mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who resides in, works in, or visits within the NEMTEK planning region. Therefore, we aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner, to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. Moving forward is the next long-range regional transportation plan for the NEMTEK region. Updated every 4 years, the Regional Transportation Plan is a blueprint that helps identify the transportation needs in NEMTEK's planning area in order to guide the use of federal funding. NEMTEK's plan covers all modes of surface transportation, including highways, roads and bridges, streets, rail and bus transit, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as freight and special needs transportation. Our region is facing difficult challenges. Despite that, looking to the future is as important as ever for the region's long-term vitality. Moving Forward proposes a regional vision that is built around 5 strategic goals. To provide a transportation system that ensures the safety and security of people and goods across all transportation uses and modes. To provide a transportation system that is maintained, operated, and coordinated to better enable reliable, easy, accessible, and seamless travel across the region. To provide a transportation system that efficiently serves today's population and plans for the growing number of residents, workers, and increasing amount of goods. To provide a transportation system that minimizes its impact on the environment, especially the effects of climate change. And to provide a transportation system that is resilient and can mitigate, adapt to, and respond to chronic and acute stresses and disruptions. As NEMTEK pursues these goals through our regional transportation planning process, the following guiding principles inform our planning. We will consider the needs of all users across NEMTEK's planning area as a whole in the planning process. We will make the best use of federal resources for the regional transportation system and increase them where practical, while leveraging local resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. We will monitor the performance of the regional transportation system as a means of prioritizing improvements and investments. We will support multi-agency approaches that enhance the integration of independently operated components of the regional transportation system. We will engage the public and community stakeholders. And we will harness technological advancements to improve our transportation system. People living in the NEMTEK region are very aware of how their transportation system works and where it needs improvement. What transportation improvements are important to you? What matters most to your community? Your input is critical as we continue planning for our region's transportation needs. So how can you get involved? Attend a public workshop, or provide your thoughts through our website or social media channels. Visit our website to join our mailing list, register for a workshop, and more. So get involved. Together, we can keep our region moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Can never get enough of that music. So hopefully that video gave you an overview of what NEMTEK is, the regional council, and how it fits into this planning process for bringing federal resources into our region. If we could go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that process itself, which starts with the orange circle, which is the regional transportation plan. This is a cycle, it's cyclical. The regional transportation plan defines long-range needs, and then a product called the Unified Planning Work Program, as well as the members planning programs, defines the improvements. So federal money does come in for planning activities also, and improvements that are needed are defined through individual studies or capital planning. That goes around the corner down below to the blue circle, which is the Transportation Improvement Program. And this is where individual projects are identified that will be federally funded. Their scope is identified as well as their schedule. So the TIP really is an enabling document. Projects have to be regardless of what they are, whether they're bus purchases, roadway projects, track repairs, whatever they tend to be, they need to be on a tip to be eligible for federal funding, and that tip needs to be adopted by a regional metropolitan planning organization like NEMTEK. After the tip, we do have to do some analysis for congestion management and for regional emissions of the tip and the plan. And then finally, as you come around the left-hand side and go back up to the dark blue circle, this all results in project planning and implementation. The money is used to make improvements to the transportation system or replace key parts of the transportation system. That is the overall metropolitan transportation planning process. Next slide, Jessica. So the plan, again, is the foundation piece for that. It's federally required. It's updated every 4 years by requirement. It is a blueprint that helps guide federal funding. And of course, it's developed collaboratively amongst NEMTEK's member agencies, but also other interested agencies, other stakeholders in the region, and of course, the interested public. Next slide. The plan covers all modes of surface transportation, and it also includes key transportation activities such as operations and management of the transportation system, and also safety, security, and regional finances. Next slide. So this is not the only public outreach that we've done to develop this plan, this draft plan. In 2020, there was an entire outreach process that happened between June and September of last year. This was a virtual program because obviously, although it was scheduled to start in March, the pandemic happened and we had to not only reschedule the outreach, but also recast it as a virtual outreach program. So we offered online regional workshops. We offered an online engagement platform that was available 24/7 for the entire period of the outreach program. We did do some online focus groups with residents of specific communities of concern and users of specialized services. We did a lot of social media advertising, paid and unpaid, to get the word out, as well as other types of advertising. And we worked with local partner organizations throughout our planning area to try to have them amplify our message by getting our information out to their constituents and telling them about the planning process, including community-based organizations that were important to various communities throughout the region. Finally, we finished up with a pollfish survey of 1,000 respondents to fill any demographic gaps that were out there. We heard from over 4,000 people in this process, so it was pretty wide-ranging, and that was one of the highest totals we had ever achieved. So the fact that it was virtual did not necessarily hurt it in that sense, and we did hear from a lot of people. Next slide. So let's go into the plan itself, and this is where we're going to be giving you information, but also we're going to be asking you if you have any thoughts about that information. There's an awful lot of information in the plan and the congestion management process status report that we're not going to be able to get through today. So we're going to touch on the key parts of the plan and then give you information about where to view other parts if you're interested. These future needs are key foundation pieces of the plan. They define key futures in terms of population, employment, and travel. And they rely on socioeconomic and demographic forecasts as their foundation. These forecasts, which are known as SED forecasts, are made for metrics such as population, employment, labor force, and number of households. And these metrics are forecasted in 5-year intervals to the plan's 2050 horizon year. Next slide. The forecast geography is more than just the NEMTEK planning area. We have to take the larger region into account, both for proper forecasting of the socioeconomic and demographic variables and also for proper travel forecasting. So there's a 31 county region that we forecast for, and it includes subregions such as New York City, Long Island, the lower and mid Hudson Valley, northern New Jersey, and southwestern Connecticut. Next slide. Now, COVID-19 is obviously something that has disrupted the socioeconomic and demographic trends, and significantly, at least in the short term. So adjustments have been made to these forecasts to reflect the short-term impact and the resulting economic uncertainty that we're still watching play out as the pandemic grinds on. But the primary purpose of these forecasts for the plan is the long-term outlook. And that long-term outlook is less susceptible to short-term volatility. So you'll see that we're still forecasting growth, but in fact, the forecasts have been adjusted to accommodate the fact that, at least for the immediate period in the short term, there's a bit of a plateau in terms of the trends in our region. Next slide. So I believe, Jessica, we're going to go to the web portal to show this. Yes. Now this is a section of our web portal which has information about the plan, and we're going to show you first 2017 base year statistics for population. Our planning area over 12.8 million, just over 7 million jobs in the area, a civilian labor force of 6.5 million, and an average household size of 2.75. Those are the 2017 base year numbers. The forecasts for 2050 show significant growth in population to just over 14 million, another million jobs roughly, civilian labor force increasing to 7.2, and interestingly, average household size falling as households are decreasing in size. And the reason they're important to these forecasts is that the households are a primary generator of travel. And you can see some of the percent changes here that we're talking about between the base year and the forecast year. Over 10% population increase, almost 14% in jobs, almost 11% in civilian labor force, and a decrease in almost a percentage and a half in terms of average household size. So that gives you some sense of the overall scale of these socioeconomic and demographic forecasts. Jessica, let's go to the next slide. We use these forecasts in a simulation model to produce travel forecasts, and that's really the reason for doing the SED forecasting, is to get to the travel forecasts. So these are these numbers you see on this slide are the results of that travel forecasting, which is based on and uses as a foundation the socioeconomic and demographic forecasts. Significant increases in total daily trips and daily auto trips, even a higher increase in daily transit trips, and then of course VMT being vehicle miles of travel and VHT being vehicle hours of travel also increasing significantly. So as everyone's aware, we have significant levels of congestion on our system now, and growth in the future is a significant challenge to the region, and that's one of the main themes of the plan, is that challenge of future growth. Next slide, Jessica. We're also looking at growth in freight flows, and our region is unique in that there are goods that are destined for this region, there are goods that are leaving this region, there are many goods that are circulating within this region, and there are also goods that are traveling through this region between other regions. So we have a number of different trip purposes for trucks and moving goods in our region, and that puts additional demands on our roadway facilities. And as you can see here, we're forecasting very significant growth in those goods trends through the plan horizon year. And that may in fact be accelerated by what's happening now in the pandemic, when home delivery has become so important and business models are changing in terms of how retail and other businesses get goods to people. Next slide. When we consider the SED and the travel forecast, we have to think also about transformative change. There are several drivers of transformative change that are quite significant right now. Of course, the pandemic is one of them. We've already talked about that, but there are also changes in personal mobility. There's the evolution of shared mobility and shared conveyances, such as ride hailing and car sharing and micro mobility, and which includes bicycles and scooters and so forth. So that whole area is evolving. There is technological development that is affecting transportation generally. There's also the development of e-commerce and distribution innovations in the world of goods movement that again, the pandemic is in fact accelerating because business models are changing. And finally, there are technologies like distributed manufacturing, which is also known as 3D printing, which might significantly change how goods are not only manufactured, but distributed ultimately. So all these things are considered as we're looking at these forecasts into the future. Next slide. We also recognize large-scale disruptors, such as climate change, extreme weather events, the whole area of energy transformation, changing demographics and lifestyle, work style expectations. That's an area that, in fact, is being impacted by the pandemic right now, but was evolving before the pandemic, and then changing land use patterns. So these are large-scale disruptors, often outside the realm of transportation policy, but certainly affecting how mobility happens going forward. Next slide. So, whoops, too far. Okay, we do assume some impacts of transformative change in these forecasts, but we don't do so quantitatively. And so what we mean by that, it's likely that these impacts of the change that we've identified in the plan, the impacts on the plan's forecast will be somewhat muted during the first 10 years of the plan. So those forecasts we're considering to be relatively stable in those first 10 years. But beyond that initial 10-year period and onward through the horizon year of the plan, the impacts of transformative change on transportation demand and supply are increasingly uncertain and could be very significant, but it's not yet possible to reasonably forecast when and how the drivers of this change will mature. So we can think about it in a qualitative sense, but we cannot at this point put numbers on it. It's too variable. There's too many unknowns to do that. So the plan does recognize that these changes are out there, they're impacting, and they're likely to impact in the long term. Okay, over to Jessica to do our first interactive.
Thanks, Jerry. So right now we're going to ask you a series of open-ended questions. And the way that these questions work is that you can record your thoughts or comments on any of the questions that we asked just by writing a sentence or a word with your reactions. So our first question is if there are any comments on the scale of the growth forecasts that Jerry just presented. And so I'll give a minute for everyone to record their observations or their reactions in this open-ended question.
And Jessica, I think it's important to point out that if you don't have any comments today, that's perfectly fine. Right. There is time left in the comment period to compose comments and get them to us.
Right. Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. And so this question asks specifically about any comments on the adjustments we made because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this could be related to the socioeconomic and demographic trends that had to be adjusted because of the pandemic. And that could even translate to any comments on the travel forecasting changes that Jerry presented, as well as any of the freight flows that he presented. Even if you have comments on the public outreach that was done, the transition to virtual instead of in person, we'd love to hear those comments. And I also want to add that if you think of any comments related to the adjustments for COVID-19 that we made at a later portion in the presentation, feel free to write those comments in the chat message board. Those comments will also be recorded. So I'll move on to the next question. And Jerry presented on a series of transformative changes that are taken into account for the plan. So we'd like to hear any of your comments on the consideration of those transformative changes. And just to recap, again, some of them are the COVID-19 pandemic, changes to personal mobility, so how people are getting around, the evolution of shared mobility, of like micro-mobility, scooters and bikes, any technological changes or technological developments, any changes to e-commerce, and then any changes to distribution manufacturing, which is e-printing. So we'd love to hear your observations on any of those changes. And we just received a comment, and it says, flexibility on how people use the technology to use transportation. And that's a really good comment because there is a connection now with technology and apps that allow people to use public transportation and get real-time information on the arrival or departure of specific public transportation modes, as well as renting out different kinds of what we consider micromobility, so like scooters or shared biking system. So thank you for that comment. Great. And so let's move to the next slide.
Great. So we are going to now get into the guts of the plan, which is what we plan to do. And that's defined through a framework provided by a shared vision of our members for the future that identifies goals, as you saw in the video, as well as specific objectives. So we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the detail here and looking for any thoughts you have on these items. There are 5 goals. We'll be going through a couple of slides for each of the 5 goals. So let's get into it, Jessica. So the proposed shared vision for regional mobility was defined by our member agencies, and it starts with the preamble that you see up on the screen now, that the elected and appointed officials that make up NEMTEK recognize mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who reside in, work in, or visit the NEMTEK planning region. Therefore, they aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner. They aspire to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and they aspire to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. That's the preamble for the shared vision. Now, if we get into the 5 goals, as you saw in the video, they're in the areas of safety and security, reliable and easy travel, planning for changing demand, reducing environmental impacts, and resiliency. And as you saw in the video, the vision statement also identifies 6 guiding principles to basically guide our activities as we pursue those goals, considering the needs of all users, making the best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. And we now have an exercise for those. Go for it, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Jerry. So we're going to ask you now to please rank the vision goals in terms of relative importance to you. And so the way that this exercise works is that you can select a vision goal and then shift it up or down depending on what you feel is important. And so for those who joined us a little bit later, you can participate in this poll by visiting pollev.com/NEMTEK. And so this is a completely anonymous poll, so you'll be able to participate without being identified if that's an important part of your participation. So I'll give everybody a couple moments to just share what's most important to them with these vision goals in terms of relative importance, and you can rank them 1 through 5. And so just as a reminder, these vision goals are related to safety and security, reliable and easy travel, planning for changing demand, reducing environmental impact, and resiliency of our transportation system, our regional transportation system. So we have a couple of rankings coming in, and I'll give it a few more seconds before I report out what people have considered to be important to them. And so you'll see as more people provide their responses, the rankings will shift. And so it seems like we're settling on a final group ranking. So I'll give it a couple more seconds for those who are still deciding what's important to them in regards to the vision goals. Great, and it seems like safety and security has stayed at number 1. Reliable and easy travel and reducing environmental impacts is at number 2. And number 4 is planning for changing demand and resiliency. So I'll go to the next question, which is also a ranking question. And so we're asking you to rank the guiding principles that Jerry just presented and that we also heard in the video. And so these are a shortened version of the guiding principles. And so they are considering the needs of all users, best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. So I'll give everybody a moment to provide what their ranking preference is for these 6 guiding principles. Let me see something has come in. And I'll give it a couple more moments before I report out. Great, and it's number 1, considering the needs of all users. Number 2, engaging the public and harnessing technological advancements. Number 4, best use of federal dollars. Number 5, supporting multi-agency approaches. And number 6, monitoring performance. So I'll move on to the next question, which is an open-ended question again. And so we just want you to indicate any general comments that you have on the 5 vision goals that we presented and or the 6 guiding principles. And these comments could range from your initial reactions of the 5 vision goals or the guiding principles or anything you feel that we missed, or just providing your general comments on how you feel these vision goals relate to the region-wide transportation system. So I'll give everybody a couple moments to provide their feedback. And again, any comments that we receive, we're going to address them in the final plan document. But we'd love to hear from you. And our comment period ends July 27th. Is that right, Jerry? July 27th? 7th. Okay, 7th. Yeah, July 27th. So any of the information presented, you still have time to comment on that information. Okay.
And on that point, as we move on the initial slide and on the final slide, you'll see the link to the web portal for the plan, where you can find more information and also provide your commentary through that link. So, okay, so now each of the vision goals is defined in the plan through modules. So for the 5 goals, there are 5 modules. These modules include a description of the goal. They identify related objectives. They scan recent trends, current conditions, and existing initiatives. There's a listing of or recommended strategies and actions related to each goal and performance metrics for that goal. We're going to be going through each of these modules as quickly as possible without hopefully skirting over too much detail so that you can get a sense of them. And then if you have any comments about each of the goal modules, we'll be collecting those at the end of each set. So Jessica, let's go into the first one. So this is safety and security. You can see for this particular goal, there were 5 objectives identified, including investing in existing physical assets, promoting safe streets and intersection, keeping the system secure from threats, coordinating safety management, training, and education across jurisdictional boundaries and borders, and improving the safety and security of system operations. So those were the 5 objectives set. And these are the scan issues where we looked at trends in things like motor vehicle fatalities and serious injuries in public transportation safety, as well as freight transportation safety. We looked at a number of current conditions, as you can see listed there. And we always try to scan the existing initiatives that are related to these goals. And you can see those listed in the circle there. Next slide. There are several categories of recommended strategies and actions, which we're not going to go through in detail for reasons of time, but I can point out that one category is planning and research initiatives. The second has to do with data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment. The third category is planning process recommendations. And the fourth category, program recommendations, is subdivided into regional guidance programs and education and training programs. And there's a link at the bottom of the page which you can use to get to the detailed individual strategies and actions in each of these categories. Next slide. And then finally, for this particular goal, you can see the metrics identified here. Basically gross numbers of events and rates involving those events across a range of modes.
Great, thank you.
Okay,
Jerry.
Jessica, go for it.
Yeah. So we just, after the end of each module, of each of the 5 modules, we're going to ask an open-ended question of you all for any comments on the information presented. Now, as Jerry acknowledged earlier in the presentation, we know that this is a very general overview of what we've gone through, and so there's much more information in the plan, and we encourage you to go and take a look at that plan and provide any comments you have before July 27th. So we understand if right now you're getting a lot of information about the plan and don't have any comments, but we'd love to record your initial reactions if you have them. And that could be anything pertaining to the trends and current conditions, the existing initiatives, as well as any of the performance metrics that you feel that we've included throughout this safety and security portion of the presentation. Okay. Oh, more time to write the comments. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Also, I do want to remind you guys, we're also collecting comments in the chat message board.
But on that point, if we leave this particular slide to go on to the next one, thank you for that comment. You can continue to enter into this this slide.
Yeah.
So we won't miss your comments. And if for some reason you're shut out of that, just put it right in the chat pod.
So we did receive a comment. It said, concerned with freight transportation safety.
Okay, I think we're going to go on to our next goal and module, which is reliable and easy travel. This goal has 8 objectives identified for it. It's a pretty complicated area. First one is rebuilding and replacing and modernizing assets. The second is improving first and last mile access to transit. Third is providing more frequent and reliable transit service. The fourth is improving accessibility to the system for users of all abilities. The fifth is investing in improving the integration of the multimodal transit network. The sixth is the same thing, but for the freight modes and facilities throughout the region. The seventh is collecting and sharing quality transportation data. And the eighth is promoting equitable transportation and workplace access across populations, regardless of age, ability, race, ethnicity, or income. So those are the 8 objectives identified for the reliable and easy travel goal. Jessica, just look at the scan quickly. So a lot of the trends and conditions here have to do with physical assets, roads and bridges, public transportation, also some usage trends. There's a whole area of transportation systems management and operations, which includes both system operations and also demand management. And then, of course, freight transportation. And you can see the current risks that we looked at that are listed there. The aging transportation system is really first and foremost. Given the large scale of our system, the fact that it's aging is very significant and requires a huge amounts of resources, as you'll see shortly, to preserve over time. And then you can see the existing initiatives listed in the circle. Next slide. The recommended strategies and actions are in these categories for this particular goal, and the first 3 are very familiar from the previous. Under the program recommendations, though, there are groups for transit access programs. There is a subcategory for transit service enhancement programs, and finally for freight access programs. And again, there's the link at the bottom to the detail in the web portal. And finally, next slide would be the performance measures. A number of measures here having to do largely with physical conditions of the assets, pavement metrics, bridge metrics, and transit metrics, but again, the physical assets of transit mostly in this particular goal. back to you, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Jerry. And so you'll see on your pollev.com/NEMTEK screens that the question has changed to ask about any general comments on the reliable and easy travel module that was just presented by Jerry. So if you have any comments on that module, we'll give you a minute or two to write those down in this for this open-ended question. And so any of the comments that you provide, once again, I'll just let you all know that we'll address them in the final plan document. So we just received one comment, and it's a technology makes it easy to use and engage. Yeah, absolutely. Just like we're using Poll EV today and providing you 2 ways to comment on the information that you hear. And I'll give a couple more moments for anybody who is interested in providing their comments or reactions to the reliable and easy travel module. And someone just wrote that there needs to be more reaching out to the public. And I assume that it's for the Plan 2050 or this moving forward plan, that people need to be more aware of the plan.
I think we can regard that generally too, Jessica.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Can never do enough. So on
That's
that,
true.
that area. All right, let's move on to the next goal module. We're making good headway here. This goal is planning for changing demand. You can see 5 objectives here. Satisfying existing demand and relieving overcrowding is the first one. Expanding the reach of the system to underserved communities and emerging markets is the second. Encouraging walking, biking, transit-oriented development, and a number of other long-term sustainable strategies is the third. Modernizing local freight networks to efficiently plan for growth in that area is the fourth. And finally, incorporating emerging and innovative transportation services and tools into efficient network design is the fifth. Moving on from that, Jessica. So the things the trends we're scanning here have to do with roadway congestion, with goods movement trends, public transit usage, and usage of non-motorized transportation. You can see under current risks and conditions, the changing nature of the demand, both in terms of people and goods, is certainly something that's being experienced and will be experienced going forward. And then finally, under existing initiatives, you can see what's listed there, a number of existing initiatives that we scanned for this particular goal. Next slide. The recommended strategies and actions for this goal, again, the first 2 are familiar from earlier goals, but there are a number of program recommendations, and those are subcategorized as complete street programs, transit access programs, and shared mobility programs. And again, shared mobility is where the conveyance is shared across users. It could be car sharing, it could be bicycle sharing, it could be ride hailing, which is a way of shared mobility, ride hailing being Uber and Lyft and so forth. Those types of shared mobility programs where private ownership of the conveyance is not critical. And next slide. And the metrics we've identified for this goal, vehicle miles of travel per capita. So how much vehicle usage is there out there per capita? Person hours of delay, public transportation system reliability, and then several ratios having to do with travel time reliability and truck travel time reliability. Okay, go for it, Jessica.
Great. And so we're just giving everyone the opportunity to provide their specific comments on the planning for changing demand module that Jerry presented. And this could be anything in related to the current trends, as well as the categories of recommendations that he provided. And so we'd like to hear from you. And this is an opportunity to hear specifically on this module. But if you think of anything along the way, specific to this module or any of the modules that we present that we're not requesting any feedback from at that moment, you can place that comment in the chat message board and it'll be recorded for the final plan document. So I'll give everybody a moment or two. Yeah,
And
Jeremy?
as with all the other goal modules, you know, well, as you said, if there's additional detail, for example, in the recommended strategies and actions, we're going through the categories of those things, but there's more detail in the summary on the web portal. So you may not have you may not have all the information you need to comment now, but once you've reviewed that, if you're interested in any of these goal areas, you can put together more detailed comments. There's still time for that. So anything here on the planning for changing demand module?
Great. And I'll just move on. We'll move on.
Yep, let's go to the next one. We have 2 more to go. Thank you for wading through all these, but they're important because they really are the framework of the plan. This goal is reducing environmental impact. You can see 6 objectives here, including encouraging alternatives to single occupant vehicle trips, encouraging lower emissions alternatives to trucking, modernizing fleets to higher standard and lower emissions vehicles, that's fleets generally, including private fleets, efficiently managing limited roadway capacity to mitigate congestion and emissions, promoting responsible environmental stewardship in transportation projects, and finally, addressing unequal impacts of transportation emissions on communities. Those are the 6 objectives here. In terms of the scan, we looked at, for the trends, we looked at trends in criteria, air pollutants, greenhouse gases, and of course travel, which is what's generating these, vehicular travel specifically. Criteria air pollutants refers back to the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which defines a number of criteria air pollutants. Greenhouse gases you're probably very familiar with in terms of climate change. We look at various levels of current conditions in terms of congestion and system characteristics and modal choice and so forth. And you can see there are a number of existing initiatives we've scanned, including significantly the very first one, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is New York State's legislation on the climate change, which is very significant actually. We're going to show you a couple of highlights here in this particular goal because we think they're significant. For example, the trend highlight for greenhouse gases shows on the left that in New York State, greenhouse gas levels have tended to moderate over time somewhat. And you can see the transportation levels in blue and the overall totals in orangish. But on the right-hand side, you see what the goals are from the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions from 1990 levels of 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050. So those are significant targets for reducing greenhouse gases. Next slide. In the current conditions, we're highlighting vehicular travel. And what's interesting here is if you look at this listing of major urbanized areas throughout the country, and you look at population size and daily vehicle miles of travel per capita, which is vehicle use, you can see that New York City's urbanized area is rather efficient. It's got the lowest VMT per capita of all these major metropolitan areas. But then if you go to the right under travel time index, and what this indicates basically is how much additional travel time due to congestion. Anything over 1, the higher you go, the more congestion you're seeing. Our congestion levels are still quite high with 1.35 in that index, which means that although our transportation system is such that public transit absorbs a huge number of trips in our region, there's still congestion on our roadways despite that, mainly because of the size of our region, the population, and also in many ways the topography, which creates bottlenecks and pinch points. And if we look at one more slide, we really underscore that transit issue because I love this slide because this shows total transit ridership in the top 10 urbanized areas. And as you can see, the Newark, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area is by far well above any other area, including significant transit areas like Chicago, like San Francisco, like Boston and Philadelphia, our ridership is just very, very different, and our transit usage is very, very different here than in other areas. Next slide. So the recommended strategies and actions here fall into these categories under program recommendations: community planning programs, commuting alternative programs, public messaging and marketing programs, vehicular emissions programs, and innovative materials programs. Those would be materials used for construction and for facilities. And of course, there's the link at the bottom to the details. And then finally, the metrics for this slide have to do with really pollutant levels and levels of travel and delay, vehicle travel and vehicle delay, because those are the prime generators of vehicle emissions. Take it away, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Jerry. And so this is another opportunity for you to provide your comments. And here we're asking you to provide your comments specifically to the reducing environmental impact module that Jerry just presented. And this is a very, just like all the other modules, there's a lot of information within this module, and we encourage you to dive deeper into the plan, into that webpage for plan moving forward. And get a bit more comfortable with all the information presented in that plan. But if you have any reactions, particularly to the highlights that Jerry presented with transit usage and how in our region we use transit, as well as transit ridership, or vehicle miles traveled, we'd love to hear those comments. So I'll give everybody a moment or two to provide any comments that they may have.
So Jessica, Marisol just put the link to the web portal in the chat pod, the chat window. Yeah, and that web portal is both an executive summary for the plan, so it summarizes what's in the plan, but it also leads you to the detailed chapters and appendices if you wanted to look more deeply. So it's both a way to navigate the plan and the congestion management process status report, and it's also a way to summarize them. So.
Yeah, and then once you've reviewed everything in the plan, there's also a comment form that you can provide comments.
Yes. Yes.
So we have a comment that just came in, including construction and demolition debris to be containerized as MSW needs to be addressed. Locomotives that move waste by rail must be upgraded to Tier 4 so environmental impacts are minimized.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank
MSW
you.
there is municipal solid waste.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have one more goal to get through, and then we'll be finishing up on some of the plan financing and giving you some information about other aspects of the plan that you can look at in more detail in your own time. So let's go on to the fifth goal and module. That is resiliency, and the objectives here are 4: protecting and fortifying assets, continuing to invest in sea level rise and climate change risk analyses, improving regional coordination on emergency and long-term responses, and long-term, I should say, and enhancing the transportation network's resiliency by increasing travel options and redundancies. Those are the 4 objectives for the resiliency goal. The scan includes trends in environmental and climate stressors, but also in human stressors such as cybersecurity, cyber attacks, and terrorist attacks. And of course, now public health emergencies are identified. And it doesn't have to be a global pandemic to generate an impact. There are certainly more localized epidemics that can do the same thing in terms of impacts on people and transportation and travel in a particular region. We look over current conditions in those areas, and then we look at a number of existing initiatives. Many of these have been undertaken since Superstorm Sandy back in 2012, but also there are cybersecurity and counterterrorism programs as well as public health programs that are identified in the existing initiatives. Next slide. Significant here under planning and research, there are a number of research recommendations, often having to do with gathering and using and maintaining data and analyses relative to sea level rise and extreme weather events to be able to identify accurately the vulnerable transportation system. And then you see other categories of recommendations. And then finally, the metrics. So what the metrics are basically, and this is specifically related to the climate stressors, the number of vulnerable lane miles, bridges, culverts, trailways, bikeways, greenways, and separated bus facilities. So those are judged as vulnerable based on forecasts of sea level rise and the impacts of extreme weather. And then, of course, related to that, on the left you have roadway facilities, on the right you have transit facilities, and then the percent hardened against these stressors is the other part to these performance metrics.
Great, thanks, Jerry.
Sure.
So now we're just asking you all to provide any comments on this resiliency module. So it could be anything of the performance metrics that Jerry mentioned, or even the existing initiatives that we outlined in the previous slides. So we'll give everybody a couple moments. And so I just want to reiterate that this is the final of the vision goal modules that we're going to run through in this presentation, but you can review the moving forward executive summary that Marisol provided in the chat message board. And so there's a link to visit that document and go through in further detail the plan.
Yes, the plan contains a lot of information. So there is more for you to explore if you're interested in any part of it or in the plan in general. Let's go on to the next section. It's about 1:10 now. Our intention is to be finished certainly no later than 1:30. One of the things we're required to do is identify a plan to pay for the plan, and that is the next section we're going to review quickly. So Jessica, next slide. This is in the federal regulations. They require that each regional transportation plan include a financial plan that includes system level estimates of the costs and revenues reasonably expected to be available to adequately operate and maintain the highways and the public transportation systems. And then estimates of funds that will be available for the implementation of the plan, that would be the implementation of improvements, and any additional financing strategies that we are either using or have identified for the implementation of the plan. So that is the requirement. We have identified cost and revenue categories in 3 areas. This is for the federally supported transportation system, which would be the transportation system that is eligible for federal funding, which is most of our system for both transit and highways, but not all. We do have some self-financed public authorities, such as the Port Authority, that basically fund their capital program through their own resources, and their facilities are not considered to be federally supported. But for the federally supported system, you have operations and maintenance costs and revenues, you have system preservation costs and revenues, and system enhancement costs and revenues. We're just going to show you some of the numbers involved just to give you a flavor of this. There's a whole chapter dedicated to this in the plan. For operations and maintenance on the left-hand side, that shows the cost by agency for operations and maintenance. So this is day-to-day operations and maintenance. So it's to keep the system running, basically. You can see the enormous cost of the MTA system in terms of operations and maintenance, given its vast size, and the smaller costs for each individual agency grouped by geography. The total cost here is $906 billion with a B dollars over the life of the plan from 2022 through 2050, which averages out to something in the neighborhood of $20 billion a year. That's in year of expenditure dollars. You'll see that term. We're required under federal regulation to forecast and inflate costs and resources, or escalate resources to the year that they're intended to be either gathered or used. So that's what year of expenditure dollars indicates. On the right-hand side, you can see our forecasts of revenues available to meet these costs for operations and maintenance, which was done basically by forecasting operating budgets from our member agencies. And although the numbers are not equal, and they're proximate to each other, both in terms of of transit revenues versus cost for operations maintenance, and also roadway revenue versus cost. But you also see the difference there in the size of those two cost and revenue bars for transit and for roadways. Our transit system is extremely extensive and requires a lot of resources to operate. Next slide. For system preservation and enhancement costs, on the left is a pie chart that shows the system preservation cost by mode for the federally supported transportation system. This is in millions of YOE dollars. So as you can see, we're forecasting about 750 billion with a B dollars in cost in YOE dollars just to preserve the existing system, and anything we add to it over the course of the plan. Most of that is transit, 88%, but again, there's also slices for pavements and for bridges. On the right-hand side is the cost of system enhancement. So we're not just looking at preserving our system, but then what can we do to enhance it? Our enhancement needs go beyond this number, but this is what we were able to identify within the revenue envelope that we'll be talking about in just a minute for the overall implementation of the plan. And it ranges from minor system enhancements, which are usually under $100 million, to an itemized list of major system enhancements, which are $100 million or more, that are in the fiscally constrained plan. So you can see them listed there. And the total cost there for enhancements is about $50 billion in year of expenditure dollars. Next slide. And so here are the estimated funds for plan implementation by different categorizations, totaling $804 billion. So that is what it encompasses both the system preservation costs that you saw on the previous slide and the system enhancement costs. And if you look at that orange box there in the upper right, you can see that this is highly leveraged. Total federal participation is about 20% in terms of estimated reasonably expected funds for the life of the plan. The rest comes from state and local sources, particularly local public authorities, and that's about 80%. So that federal portion is very important. We need that desperately, but our region highly leverages that federal portion to accomplish what needs to be done to preserve and ultimately enhance the system that we have. Next slide. There are some proposed additional financing strategies that are identified in the plan and contribute to that financial picture that we just showed you. They include public-private partnerships, value capture, which is basically capturing the value of new development to make transportation improvements, debt financing, generally bonding and other forms of debt financing, discretionary federal funding, where we compete nationally for discretionary pots of federal resources, and then finally cordon pricing, which is being developed in our region for Manhattan south of 60th Street. Next slide.
Great. So we're just collecting any general comments on the cost forecasts and our overview of the plan to pay for the plan, and or the system enhancement projects that Jerry mentioned. So on those system enhancement projects for the Second Avenue subway phasing, the Jamaica station enhancements, and any minor enhancements that are needed and funded through the plan, or proposed funding through the plan. So if you have any comments on this module that Jerry just presented, we ask that you please provide your comments here, or you provide your comments in the chat message board. But again, we understand that this is a lot of information, and we have developed a web portal that is kind of like an executive summary that is really interactive, and you saw bits of it in the earlier pieces of the presentation, and it goes through in detail all of that we presented in these modules. So I'll give everybody a moment or two to provide their comments. And you can provide your comments at polev.com/NEMTEK.
Okay, just a minute more, and then we'll go on to the last part of this
Right.
session today.
Great. And so we have a comment just come in and it says the tip projects for getting rid of measurable pollution from waste by rail, 1970s locomotives need repowering to Tier 4. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so this is actually the last interactive. We're just going to give you some information about other things in the plan that you might be interested in, but for these, you're going to have to go and look at the information, and then if you'd like to submit any comments, that would be on your own before the comment period closes on July 27th. So there are a number of special elements that are required that are, in fact, appendices to the main plan document. These include a pedestrian bicycle element. They include a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan to try to bring those two areas together, since human services transportation and specialized services are an important part of our transportation system in this region. There's a regional freight element that's specific to freight. And then finally, there's an environmental justice and Title VI assessment. That would be Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then environmental mitigation and new consultation, which is a required part of the plan from the federal regulations. So these are some key plan appendices that, again, if you're interested in any one of these specific areas, we encourage you to go to the web portal and take a look either at the appendix itself or at the summary of the appendix. Next slide. Beyond the recommended strategies and actions, there are also recommended projects, programs, and studies in the plan. And again, we don't have time to go through these, but we do have an interactive system on the web portal to show you. So for the projects, programs, and studies, Jessica's going to bring up that section of the web portal. So what this is it's an interactive visualization of each individual proposed project, program, or study. You can hover over any of those lines or icons and get information about what's there, and also listed underneath are the details of each of those projects and whether they're in the fiscally constrained plan, whether in the vision element, which is a speculative element that's not within the financial envelope, or whether they are region-wide projects. This is every project, program, and study that can be mapped, that's spatial. There are obviously projects, programs, and studies that are not spatial that we can't map to a specific area. So this is available for you to peruse in the web portal, and you can look at your specific area and see what's in the plan for that area. If we could go back now to the PowerPoint, okay. That we also have coordinated development emphasis areas in the plan appendix that includes the projects, programs, and studies. These are areas where coordination between transportation and development, desired growth development projects are critical, and they really form a kind of a framework for a lot of the transportation improvements. So this is an attempt to bring transportation planning and land use planning closer together. And finally, we are required to provide additional details for those major investments that we talked about earlier. So they are provided in this appendix also. They're just write-ups for each of these that hit all the required points in the regulations. Next slide. And finally, not part of the plan, but related to it, is the congestion management process status report. So let's move into the next slide, which gives you an overview of this. So the federal requirements, since we are in an area that's defined as a transportation management area, we have to systematically forecast traffic congestion for our planning area and produce specific performance measurements to identify levels of congestion, and then prepare a program to reduce that congestion. And our congestion management process fulfills these requirements. Next slide. So we publish a status report on the CMP with each new regional transportation plan. And that status report provides an overview rather of the CMP itself and its methodology. It presents the results of the most recent analyses and forecasts of congestion, and describes the strategies committed to in the plan to address the current and forecasted levels of traffic congestion. So important to note here, this isn't yet another plan. These are items that are already in the plan that are geared towards mitigating congestion. Next slide. There are a number of performance metrics here, which we're not going to go through in detail, but you can see them here, having to do with travel time reliability and delay and so forth, average speeds, and so on. Next slide. We've gone through some of these peer region comparisons, which are part of the CMP status report. Certainly the table on the left we talked about. So we do try to compare our region to other regions, other metropolitan regions in the country. And then, next slide. We also look at forecasted conditions in each county and borough in our planning area. So that'd be the 5 boroughs in New York City and the 5 suburban counties in our planning area. The blue bar is for each of these metrics is the 2019 level. The orange reddish bar is the 2050 forecast. And on the left, you have daily vehicle miles of travel. And on the right, you have daily vehicle hours of delay. Those are just 2 of the metrics that are in the CMP status report. Next slide. And we do a pretty extensive individual county and borough analysis, including forecasts and identification of current bottlenecks in these areas. So you can really dig into each of the counties and boroughs and get a lot of information there about their growth patterns and how congestion is now and how it likely will be in 2050. Next slide. Finally, the congestion management strategies and system enhancement investments. First of all, there is a toolbox of strategies, the very first bullet, that's generic, that is unique to the CMP status report. So we present this toolbox as a way for our members and others to think about various types of congestion mitigation techniques, strategies, programs, and so forth. But then we do list the relevant goals, objectives, and strategies and actions from moving forward relevant to congestion management. And we identify the system enhancement investments programmed in moving forward and the federal fiscal years 2020 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program. So again, the CMP is not yet another set of projects. It really identifies and informs the plan, and the plan itself identifies the congestion management items. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Jerry.
So, there is one more. I'm sorry,
yeah.
I was wrong with what I said.
No, it's okay. It's okay. This is a more general question. So since we're reaching the very near end of our presentation today, we just wanted to make sure that we touch base and asked if you guys had any questions, not questions, if you had any additional comments on any of the information presented today. So it's doesn't have to just be related to the CMP status report information that Jerry presented, but it could be anything, any thought that came up or any idea that you had on any of the vision goal modules that we presented or the plan to pay for the plan. And I do encourage you to look through the web page that Marisol has placed in the message board and to look through that and provide any comments that you may have for until our comment period, which is open until July 27th. Yeah, and so I'll give everybody a few moments to just write any comments that they may have on any of the information presented today.
There was an additional comment put in the chat pod, which we've noted also on.
Great.
More than one, actually. So that's all part of it.
Great. So we just got a comment here, and it says, NEMTEK addresses the lack of regional planning for waste by rail. NEMTEK has a regional plan for municipal solid waste, so thank you for that. However, NEMTEK's planning must include construction and development, construction and demolition debris as well. In action item 2.2 C and D, including domestic and commercial waste must be included. This containerization issue must be addressed to minimize impacts on the environment, which is one of the NEMTEK's goals. All waste by rail covered. In addition, there needs to be tip projects for getting rid of measurable pollution from waste by rail. 1970s locomotives repowered to Tier 4 switchers. There are limitations to the 10-acre rail yard in Glendale, Queens. Everything on and off Long Island must go through this rail yard, creating bottlenecks and overpasses, becoming part of parking empty rail cars. congestion strategies are needed. So we thank you for this comment, and we will place it in comments received in the formal document. And I'm not able to see the comment that was placed in the message board, but we thank you for that comment as well.
Okay, let's go to the final slide or slides. So the schedule going forward, just so you know, go ahead, Jessica. So the comment period opened on June 28th. It closes on July 27th. And then on August 19th, NEMTEK's Program Finance and Administration Committee is going to recommend a version of the final draft and CMP status report for adoption by the full NEMTEK Council. So those would be the NEMTEK principals. And they're going to meet on September 9th to formally adopt the final draft plan and the CMP status report, after which they will be transmitted to the federal oversight agencies. And we hope to have everything in place and approved or accepted by the federal agencies by the start of the next federal fiscal year on October 1st of 2021. So that is the plan development endgame. I don't know, do we have one more slide here, Jessica? Oh,
Yeah,
just
just
one.
one
Okay.
final.
So the link to the web portal is on this slide, and it's been in the chat pod. We really appreciate your time with us today and your patience in wading through a lot of information about this plan, but there's a lot more out there. So please feel free to submit additional comments by July 27th at 4 o'clock. And with that, we want to thank you for your time and your attention, and hope you have a pleasant rest of the day and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.